Welcome to the Free Library of Philadelphia. My name is Andy Cahan, Director of Author Events, and I am excited to see so many of you here and to welcome back our author this evening. His writing has received some of the most prestigious awards that the literary world has to offer. The National Book Award, the Dublin Impact Literary Award, and he has been named a Chevalier of Arts and Letters by the French government. All of that adulation could go to a writer's head, but not Colum McCann's. My colleague and I watched this afternoon as Colum spoke to a small but diverse group of local high school students. They were young, impressionable, and a bit overwhelmed by their proximity to a writer. But McCann learned their names and put them at ease with his honest humor and welcoming words. He told them that they each had a story worth telling, that if they could sit down for hours and hours and hours on end, were courageous and had the stamina, they too could become writers someday. Of course, there's more to the story, and that's what we're here to find out. Tonight, my Author Events colleague Jason Freeman will lead Colum in a discussion about the craft of writing he presents in his 11th book, Letters to a Young Writer. Please welcome Colum McCann and Jason Freeman.
Welcome, and welcome to all of you. I was wondering if we could start with a bit of a reading.
I'm going to start with a bit of a reading, and I'm not going to give you the chapter title because it will become apparent about a paragraph from the end. And the quote for this particular chapter is from Henry James, who says, "3 things in human life are important. The first is to be kind. The second is to be kind. And the third is to be kind." Hey, you, over there in the corner. Yeah, you, with that half-ass grin. Don't turn away. I know that grin. I've worn it myself. Listen up. Yeah, you, half listening but pretending not to. Don't get too attached to the romantic illusions of yourself. You hear me? Yeah, you over there with the tilted chin. Listen up. Save yourself from yourself, young writer. Being a writer is not about the cocaine or the White Horse Tavern or the tab of acid or the Crazy Horse Saloon. No, it is really about the Crazy Horse Saloon. Or the vial of laudanum or the late night of bottled beer bravado. It's not about the hangover, or the warehouse party, or the jacket photo, or the Facebook entries, or the tweets, or the twats, or whatever they're called. It's not about the shirt you wear, or the hat, or the scarf, or the white suit, or any other ridiculous affectation, mea culpa. It's not about the spotlight. It's not about gloating. It's not about reaching around to slap your own back. In the end, nobody really gives a shit about the writer's life unless the writing is there first. That's all that matters. That's the end point. What appears on the page is what makes your life interesting. Too many young writers think of themselves as writers rather than that which they have written. Get used to this. It must be on the page. So don't walk around thinking of yourself as a writer. Nothing worse than an author constantly obsessed with himself. Don't prop up the corner of the party with announcements about your brand new story. Don't go into a workshop prattling on about your new opening salvo. Don't draw attention to any part of your life as an artist, or even worse, an artiste. If someone genuinely wants to know, they will ask. Say nothing. At least until you need to say something. Don't get me wrong. I'm not advocating a clean rap sheet or an empty liquor cabinet or prissy behavior. You don't have to live a mannered life. You don't have to be sober. But be sober while you write, please. Don't fall into that trap. You don't have to be obsequious. You don't have to kowtow to anyone. You don't have to listen to older writers spouting their rubbish either. In fact, forget this letter. Go, get lost, go write, rip it up, go write your own and see what it takes. A writer writes. But first allow me 4 words of the sagest advice I know. Don't be a dick. I can't believe I just did that. This is the first night that this is the first time I've ever read from this since, so the book gets published tomorrow, so I have to say it again. Don't be a dick. At the party, in the bookstore, on the page, in your own head. Don't call people names. Don't insult your colleagues. Don't tell people how great you are. Don't drink all the wine, just most of it. Don't complain that there's nobody listening. Don't ignore your friends. Don't smirk. Don't think yourself better. Don't relegate your humility and allow it to become arrogance. Don't smoke when you're asked not to. Don't drop the silverware from the balcony. Don't gossip. Don't get sick on the carpet. I know, I've done those things. Don't insult the host. Don't condescend. Don't leave your partner stranded. Don't talk about your contract. Don't mention your advance. Don't sigh. Don't yawn. Don't scratch that public itch. Don't dismiss. Don't scan the room. Don't lie. Don't fawn. Don't drop your publisher's name. Don't make a fanfare of yourself. Don't patronize. Don't humiliate. Just don't be a dick.
Thank you very much. There was absolutely no way that I wasn't going to ask you to read that, so thank you. And just so you know, this book is comprised of 51 other essays that you are going to read with that voice in your head, so you're in for a treat. So this book is described on the jacket, actually, as a call to look outward rather than inward, and I thought it was a really fascinating mix of both. That there are so many things I think people expect of writing books. You know, here's how we do character, here's what plot means. But the externalities, too, about don't eat at your workspace, don't, you know.
Don't write in your bedroom.
Right. You only want to have one kind of dream there. I love that line. So I guess there are a lot of writing books. There are legion. What do you think those books are missing? Why is this vital to you? Why is this important to you?
Well, to be honest with you, it wasn't vital to me at all, and I'm always so sick and tired of people like pretending that they can give you advice. And what happened was I got asked by Story.org to write a sort of manifesto, and I thought, okay, I'll write a letter to a young writer, and I wrote about a couple of pages, and then someone said to me, "Oh, that's good. You should do that more often." And so last year, starting in January, I decided to write an essay on Facebook sort of every single week. And some of them were just like 1 word, 2 words. Some of them were a couple of paragraphs. And I thought I was going to get, the publisher said to me, yeah, it's going to go viral. You're going to be fine. And so I kept waiting, and I asked the person who looks after my Facebook. She said, well, you got 3 new people this week. And I was like, oh my God. It's like, and so it was like, oh, and it was going on. And it wasn't until I wrote, guess what, Don't Be a Dick, that it went viral. But the reason it went viral, I think, was because when it went online, there was no comma between Don't Be a Dick. It said, Don't Be a Dick, Colum McCann. It was like a warning. And, some people, and then I thought, and I'm in the middle of a very serious novel, and it's going to take me a long time, and I thought, oh, it might be a nice time to and I like this book now an awful lot, and I mean, obviously it comes out tomorrow, but I think I'm happy with it, and that's my standard is, are you going to be embarrassed by this 5 years or 10 years or 20 years from now? And I hope not.
I dare say you won't be. It's terrific. So one thing I found really interesting in the words on the page stuff, how it is that we write, that you seem to tackle a lot of conventional wisdom about writing. You say, write what you don't know. You have one of my favorite, apparently like this novelist James Joyce. And you say, don't worry about plot. You say the greatest novel ever written has very little apparent plot. A cuckold walks around Dublin for 24 hours. No shootouts, no cheap shots, no car crashes. Why do you think people get so hung up on plot?
I think people get hung up on plot because they're wrong. Nobody cares what happens. Everybody cares about how it happens. If you think about when you go into a pub, right, and you sit down to tell a story, you don't start the story, and you tell people, let me tell you about the time my mum murdered my dad, And then you're completely captivated by the whole thing. The plot is all gone. It's all about how it eventually unfolds. And I say in the book, sort of a little bit tongue-in-cheek, that plot is juvenile. But what I mean by that is plot is subservient to character. Character is everything. And character is created by language, which means that it's all about the sound of the words. And if you look at Ulysses, and if you dwell in Ulysses, you'll see that very little apparently happens. There are no car crashes. There is a biscuit tin that gets thrown across through the air, but it becomes a vast compendium of the human heart. It is one of the most gorgeous, risk-taking novels, and it actually takes everything on, which is plot to me. Of course, things have got to happen. I mean, of course, you have to have things happen. Things happen all the time, but we don't have to be a servant to plot. I think that's damaging, and I think you're in an MFA program, and do you teach as well?
I used to.
Right. So, you know the way that in some places they tell you, well, you have to have this happen. I don't think so. It unfolds, don't you think, with language?
I do. And something I found really fascinating that you talk about, that this is perhaps a consequence of a lot of pop culture, too, a lot of narrative-driven film, and that,
right.
And that, well, there's this obvious 3-act structure, and we have to get from there to there.
Right.
I'm not one of those people that says there's a lack of creativity in the world or anything like that, but do you think sometimes it's just easier to follow that model, too?
Sometimes it is, but I think most of us like difficulty. I like the notion that Spinoza says that all things excellent are as difficult as they are rare, and I think about my son right now. He's 18 years old. He started reading Dante's Inferno on his own and started reading Knut Hamsun's Hunger. And these difficult things that I didn't actually take on till I was in my mid-20s. And I sort of envy him that. He's going through all that difficulty, but he loves it in the end. And I think one of the problems with our educational system is that we don't push our kids enough. We don't ask them to do the hard thing. We don't ask them to learn poems off by heart. We don't ask them to study tough books. I was reading Gerard Manley Hopkins and Dylan Thomas and poets like that when I was 12, 13 years old, and I was lucky. I feel very, very lucky that my teachers forced me, or at the time I thought it was forcing me. Now I think it was a great grace that they gave me to study these good writers and to be confused.
Mm-hmm.
The problem is that we just, we're so in love with the idea of ease, and you should get a trophy for everything that you've done and all these sort of things. Whereas I think we should be really, I quote Vonnegut in the book, and I love this quote. He says, we should be jumping off of cliffs and developing wings on our way down, which I think is just really fantastic. Because I think in certain ways our children should be courting failure rather than terrified by it. I know my own kids are terrified by the idea of failure, and I try to assure them it's going to be okay, it's going to be okay. Go hard, but they sort of pull back a little bit.
Right. And the often quoted Beckett line is there in your book, and I love that too.
My students hate me for this because I quote it all the time, and I bet I'd say at least half the audience know this quote: no matter, try again, fail better. And I love that notion, that you have to push yourself, because if you don't push yourself far enough, then you're just not going to get far enough. It seems to me quite logical. But to a lot of people, they want to retreat into certain safe places, including publishers, including, intellectuals and so on. They want to retreat. And our political parties right now, I mean, my God, I have never met a person in this country as stupid as the political parties want them to be. There is nobody out there as stupid as the Republican Party, and the Democrats. No, but they're not. They're so strict. It's as if they want you to sit in this like permanent intellectual straitjacket, and you can't hold these different contradictions. And it seems to me that the essence of intelligence, and it's not me, like this has been said many times before, but the essence of intelligence is the ability to hold at least two, preferably more, ideas, contradictory ideas, in the palms of your hand at the exact same time. But nobody is giving the American public any credit for that. In fact, they're expecting them to fall down in a particular trench, and I think that's part of our problem right now.
Right. If there was sort of a word cloud for the ideas in this book, struggle would be, in one of those large bubbles. And it got me thinking, and it's to a young writer, what did you struggle with most, kind of backing up to talking about your youth, what did you struggle most within your writing as you were coming up?
I wallpapered a bathroom in Brenham, Texas. I wallpapered the whole bathroom with rejection slips on the ceiling too. So every time I went to sit on the throne, I could think about all those people who and I would go down every single day for years on end and go down to the post box, and most of the time there was nothing there, but every now and then there would be a letter from a publisher there saying, sorry, or a magazine, sorry. And at a certain stage, and I think most young writers go through this, I said, okay, I'm going to stop sending my stuff out, but I'm still going to write, because I think a writer has to write. Mm-hmm. She has to keep going. There's nothing else that she can do. It's what keeps her alive. But then when I sort of gave up on it, that's when I got a publication, and then within a couple of months, then I got a contract and that sort of stuff. But dealing with the failure, telling people at parties that you were a writer and when you weren't, that was really hard. Especially when you were trying to get the cute girl or something like that.
Right.
Yeah.
That's the only time you're allowed to tell someone. No, I love that there is such practical advice. Don't tell people you're working on a novel, because they're going to ask you when it's finished. And that's just something I was kind of wondering. What did you learn anything about writing by writing this book?
I learned that I'm a liar. Because honestly, right now, I'm in the middle of, or not even the middle, I'm at the start of a novel, and I'm breaking all my own rules. I still wake up in the morning. I tell people in the book, cut off your internet, don't go to soccernet.com, don't do all these things. And I wake up in the morning, I still check my email. My favorite time would be dream time. If I could wake up at the morning at 5 o'clock in the morning and have 2 or 3 hours all on my own, and just write without checking the newspapers or even making a coffee or anything, it would be perfect for me. But I realized that I don't always follow my own rules. But I think to tell people what the rules should be, they can adapt themselves to it in a certain way. And I learned a bit, because you have to think about what it is that you're saying. Because really what I want to do with this book is to give it to a young writer. And a young writer, by the way, can be like 15, can be 50, can be 64, can be 70. It doesn't really matter what actual age you are. But I want to give it to them and lop maybe 6 months or a year off their writing curve. Just with one little thing. There might be one thing I say to them in this book that will help them in a certain way.
Right. Standing up in the lobby waiting on you, two ladies passed me and went, "Young writers, I don't know what I'm going to get out of this." But
Right.
that is specifically, I'm not going to say who. That is specifically addressed here. And, you know, it comes across as very genuine. It just get back to it, right?
Right,
Yeah.
right.
So I am told that one of the young people attending our Teen Author Series event with you today had a really great
And
question.
they were so cool. And can I just say this about before we go into the question, that this library is like, I love the New York Public Library. I love this library, and I love these sort of organizations that do these things. And there's nothing more pleasurable than coming to a city or wherever it happens to be and talking with the young people. And like, so I had a chance to chat with some young people today, and it was like, honestly, it's an honor to talk to them, and you see this light in their eyes and the fire that they have and the desire that they have, and they're so scared as well. And it's always weird for them because like they look at the writer and it's like, he's alive, you know.
Well, you make me feel much better about ripping off this person's question then. What is your mental state when you're writing? How do you feel as you begin a book? How do you feel after? And I think most importantly, what does an unproductive day look like to you?
Well, when I begin a book, I'm full of vim and vigor and dreams, and I'm sure it's going to be the best thing ever. And I'm convinced that it's going to like somehow change things politically, and people are all going to be engaged. When I finish a book, I'm exhausted. I'm convinced that I'm a charlatan and nobody's ever going to read it, and I can never do anything again. And I'm not kidding. I mean, seriously, when I finish something, I like, you just pull the wool over your own eyes too. And are you going to be able to do anything ever again? And sometimes I kind of doubt it, and then you get back in and you fill yourself up and you start to read again and you get obsessed by something. I think writers write towards their obsessions. And the third part of that question was?
What's an unproductive day look like to you?
Well, a productive day could be 1,000 words, 2,000 words, even 5,000 words, but it could also be minus 1,000 words. So you go in and you chop away and you work. An unproductive day is when you like just don't do it. You know, you just don't. When you wash the dishes and you wash your clothes and you pay the bills and you walk the dog and you know and you have a drink too early in the afternoon and whatever it happens to be, it's like an unproductive day is when you don't get to the heart of the matter, and it always fills me with anxiety when I have that sort of day, when I don't actually write. And you know, sometimes you get that when you're on book tour and stuff like that, but then also you connect with people. And I think an unproductive day would be just lazing around too much and being happy with yourself. You should never be happy with yourself.
Now that sounds writerly. So I have some questions, and if we get a chance here, I want to get to Gary Steingart, the greatest blurber of all time, who blurbed a program that I wrote for his appearance here, and he blurbs the section on blurbing. Oh yeah, it's fantastic. It's going to get super meta. But if we can get to that in a minute. So for today and the future, you know, you talk about to MFA or not MFA,
right.
The great question for all of, you know, creative types after undergrad. And that's addressed here, but I wonder if there's a third thing. Where do you think the next great writers are coming from? Do you think the paradigm's changing? Do you think, I don't know, blogging, YouTube, you know, something about geography, in terms of genre, medium, etc. Where do you think the next great writers are going to come from?
I think I've been thinking about this for quite a while. I've been waiting for a young writer to come along and really shake up the idea of what a book happens to be. and yet allow it to remain a book. And what I mean by this is that I want them to write something on the internet or in the ether that somehow also translates into that magical thing that you can put on the coffee table. It's possibly already been written, it's possibly already been done. I haven't yet seen it, but you know what I mean? It's like I want a book that I can thumb through, but I also want a book that shakes up our ideas of narrative and storytelling, that like talks to the fracture that we are, that somehow confronts this hyper real universe that we're living in, that makes these tremendous shotgun leaps from one thing to the other. I write in a fractured way. Like that way would have been considered experimental maybe in the 50s and 60s, before the London School and things like that. But nowadays, it's an ordinary style. We're used to people making those sort of meta leaps. And I'm waiting for some young genius to come along, or some elderly genius to come along, and talk to the fracture of storytelling, yet how we are absolutely tied together.
Thank you. So, get to work, y'all.
We're going to throw it out there.
Well,
there for
I
the
got one more
questions.
for you here, and
No,
you touched on this. Your last essay begins with a quote by Edna O'Brien. It says, "That is the mystery about writing. It comes out of afflictions, out of the gouged times when the heart is cut open." And you touched on this a little bit. And you say that the crisis of our age is that we're living in stunned submission to the circumstances of the times, the rule of politicians and bureaucrats and that's about as oblique as it gets. Like, right. It's very specific. So, in this climate, what's our responsibility as writers? Do we have one?
That's a really, really good question. Not everyone has one. I have one. If I was in class with you, I'd probably say you have one. But Emily Dickinson didn't feel that she had a social responsibility, and she wrote about this at the same time. She had an internal, personal responsibility. She wrote at the same time as Walt Whitman, who felt that he absolutely did. So I don't think there's a specific way for one writer to operate over another. I don't think that there's a better way for people to write. But I want my students, if I can, to sort of engage, to look around themselves, to throw away the GPS, and to get lost for a little while and start stirring things up again, and also to look at what's going on around us. I'm not calling on people to be angry necessarily, but it used to be, when you think about the 30s, the 40s, even all the way to the 60s, from Dreiser to Steinbeck to Hemingway to Mailer to even earlier to Woolf and maybe even later all the way up to Toni Morrison, people in power feared writers. They were aware of what it was they were saying and what it was that they wanted to say. There seemed to be some sort of responsibility that was attached to the idea of being a writer. Now, that's not necessarily a good thing, but nowadays it seems to me that the writer has to work out of a more reckless inner need. Like it's an inner need, certainly until recent political events. The writer, for the last 20 years, has been working out of an inner recklessness. There might be a weather change, not a climate change, but there might be a weather change right now where the writer feels that he or she has to respond absolutely to what's going on right now. I'm not sure that fiction is the best place in which to do that. I think fiction needs a sort of a look back. Fiction needs at least 5 years to resolve what it is that went on in the past, and to figure how the past has influenced the present. It is, though, a good time to dilate the nostrils of all those young writers and say, right, this is your responsibility. You got to do something because we are in trouble. And when your funding gets taken away, when they don't even care enough about your books to burn your books anymore, part of you has to get up and say, right, I got to do something. I got to say something. I'm not calling on the young writer that she or he has to do that. Personally, I feel that I have to do that. I want to do that. And there will be someone come along who will sort of rock things open in all sorts of ways. But this might have been the crisis of every single age, all the way back to Shakespeare and beyond.
Right. Whoever said, may you live in interesting times, really wasn't. Okay. Mike, I had a speed round. I'm only going to ask you one from the speed round. Do you have a favorite Van Morrison album?
Astral Weeks.
That is absolutely the correct answer.
Yay.
Okay.
I was wondering, how do you feel that specifically your fiction work is connected to the moment you start writing it in, and how does that relationship change, especially with the really extraordinary pace of life as you continue working on the work, right, because writing takes such a long time?
Yeah, that's a great question, because we are living in what I like to think of now as the exponential age. We are traveling at such a pace. It's like Moore's law applied not only to computers, not only to technology, but to ideas, to news, to fracture, and all these things are happening so quickly that you have to look at it and figure, how am I going to stand outside of this increasing mosaic of change and try to make sense of it. And I think you do some of that by understanding that you have to have a little bit of distance between you and the time that you're writing about. I mean, I do not want to write a novel about 2017, not only because it won't come out till 2019 and it will already be dated, but because I'm just too close to it at that particular time. Give me, I'd rather, it always struck me that to write the 9/11 novel, you needed 5 years away from 9/11, and because the place where we are now is the place where we have been before, and we have to be able to recognize where we have been. So it is a question that's always on the mind of a novelist in particular. Poets, maybe it's slightly different, because you've got quicker time to get in and get out, and you can write about exactly what's going on. Certainly journalists have to write about what's going on now. And it seems to me, to be honest, there is no difference between a poet and a playwright and a journalist and a fiction writer. They all have a duty to the right word at the right time and to tell a really good story.
So I know Elizabeth Gilbert has this phrase of going to the writing desk with stubborn gladness. I don't quite know what that means, but when you get to that place where you're lost and you've had a couple do-nothing days, besides writing your way out of that downward spiral, are there other things that you find help to get you kind of back on track?
Nice question. I like the phrase stubborn gladness. I don't exactly know what it means either, but it evokes something in me that I sort of recognize. That ability to, in the face of all available evidence, to believe that something good is going to happen and to be stubborn about it. And so when I hit those days when things aren't actually happening, well, it's writing that gets me out of it generally. But there are other things, and this is kind of pedestrian and silly, but I like to take a run. I like to, I recently joined a gym, and I do yoga class. and yeah, I do the world's worst downward dog. uh, But it's kind of funny. It's actually I find yoga class very funny because there's all these beautiful people there, you know, men, women, whatever, and they're all there, and I'm there at the back of the room just laughing my ass off. Like, I'll never look like that, but it's kind of funny to think about it.
Do you have a palate cleanser movie or book or a song or something like that? It can be very lowbrow. We like lowbrow around here.
In terms of songs, there's an album I'm listening to right now by another Colum, a guy called Colum McCann, and he wrote an album called And Now the Weather, and Nishan Imshire, for all those people, or for a couple of people who might be able to speak Irish out here. It's a beautiful album. It's kind of like Philip Glass meets Planxty or the Chieftains. It's just so profound and gorgeous, and I put that album on and I'm transported away and taken somewhere good. And music does it to me. If I want to get like sort of melancholy, I'll do David Gray, you know, or Rachel Yamagata, or you know, someone like that. But Colum McCann is a fantastic one to go to. And then in terms of books, can I tell you, there's a little book. When I was cycling across the United States, I ended up teaching at a home for juvenile delinquents in Texas, and these kids, and we were down a creek bed, and they'd be there for 3 months, a long time, right? And my bad joke is that I was teaching them to be more delinquent than they already were. But I loved these kids, and it was fantastic to be with them. But I would read them to sleep at night. But their favorite book, not Catcher in the Rye, not Grapes of Wrath, whatever else, their favorite book was a book called Fup by Jim Dodge, F-U-P. It's a gorgeous little thing about about a duck and a pig in California, but they loved it because it was Fup Duck, you know. But it's a brilliant book. Does anybody heard of Jim Dodge? He's you should see if you can get it. It's one of those gorgeous books that you will cherish and you will start giving to other people. Another one of those books is a book called, does anybody know Stoner by John Williams? Now that's a really serious book, very different to Fup. And it's not about a stoner as such, it's about a guy called John Stoner. And it's a beautiful book about a professor of the classics in the Midwest. And it's one of the forgotten classics of the American 20th century.
Yes, you were talking about breaking the paradigm, and I'm wondering if you'd had a chance to read, or if you would think that this would go towards that. A girl is a half-broke thing, or a half-formed thing.
Absolutely.
Einer McBride. Would you think that that would be something reaching a little bit
towards
a new way of communicating?
No, I don't think it's reaching towards a new way of communicating at all. I think that Emer wrote a really incredible book, a fantastic book, but it wasn't necessarily breaking new territory. I mean, if you read Edna O'Brien from the early 1970s, books like Night and things like that, she was doing similar things, and Emer would give great credit to somebody like Edna O'Brien. There's nothing new under the sun. Yeah. There is really nothing, and we have to understand this, and we have to say it over and over and over again. And this is part of our function. You will say things differently, but the idea that you break entirely new territory, it happens very, very, very rarely. But I think she's one of our stars. In terms of the young, there are a lot of interesting, really good young writers coming out of Ireland right now. Part of it had to do with the economic collapse and things like that. And my generation was a different generation. I used to joke with Frank McCourt. I say, because I grew up suburban, my dad was a journalist, my mum was a housewife. I had the worst thing a novelist can have, which is a happy childhood. And I used to joke with Frank McCourt. I was so pissed off at him because he got all the misery in Ireland, right? And left none for me. And I had to go out and search for it myself.
Hi. So my question is that a lot of your novels surround factual people or factual events, but it's the fictional world that surrounds them. So what is your advice to somebody who would like to write about history and fact, but not write a nonfiction novel?
Oh, I like this very much because it's very much on my mind. I gave an interview to Atlantic magazine sometime around 1999, saying ridiculously, this is why you should not believe in anything I say tonight. I said that to write about real people shows a true failure of the imagination. 6 months later, I started writing about Rudolf Nureyev, right? Now, one of the reasons I wrote about Nureyev, let me tell you a little story. There was a guy called Jimmy who I met in a pub in Dublin. All the great stories start in the pub. But I met him in a pub, and in Brooklyn. I met him in Brooklyn, but he was from Dublin. So I was from Dean's Grange, sort of a nice part of Dublin, near Dunleary, near Foxrock and everything. He was from the Flats. And he started telling me a story. He was the exact same age as me, how in 1974, when the World Cup was about to go on, his father, who came home every single night and beat the living shite out of him, came home one night sober, having spent the money not on booze, but on a television set. He carried the television set up to the house. All the kids were around. They were all proud, and they plugged the television set in, and they put the rabbit ears on the top of it, and guess what? Nothing happened. They got grey snow. And Jimmy said that night, his father, out of his humiliation, gave him the worst beating of his life. Right? He said he would never forget it. But the next day, he heard in school that if he plugged the thing into an extension cord and maybe carried the television out onto the balcony of the flats, he might get a reception. So he's there with his brother and sisters, and he never forgot the moment. He's carrying the television set, 1974, Dublin, out onto the balcony of the flats, and the very first image that leaps out of this grayness, the snow, was Rudolf Nureyev dancing. And I thought, oh my God, that's such an incredible story. And it's a true story. But you know what? That will never make it into the official biography of Rudolf Nureyev. Because biographies are about power and rich people and people who are involved in the arts. But what happens to the Jimmies of the world? What happens to those sort of stories? So I started to think about trying to write an accidental biography based on sort of like true stories. And I've been doing it more or less ever since. And I'm writing a novel right now about the set in the Middle East, in Israel and Palestine, and I'm really messing with that in several different ways. I'm trying to actually write a sort of wiki novel, like to challenge my young writers to see if they can come up with something, to do that, and really challenging fact and fiction and interlacing fact and fiction. So talking about all sorts of things that are are available on the internet, but I sort of make up half of them too as well at the same time.
In the discussion of breaking barriers that society creates, do you think that there's such thing as a topic that's too sensitive to be written about?
That's a really good question, and my answer is no. But there are some things that are so sensitive that it's incredibly difficult to talk about. And you gave me a chance to talk about something that's very close to my heart, which is an organization called Narrative 4. And Narrative 4 is a story exchange organization where we get young people from around the world together to tell one another's stories. But recently, just before Christmas, along with New York Magazine, we decided to do one with adults, and we decided to do a story exchange about gun awareness. Now, you guys know, especially in this state, and that guns are a hot topic. Some people say you have to have them. Some people say you can't have them. There are all these nuanced debates that are going on. So we took in 40 people from around the United States. Tamir Rice's mother, the guy who sold Trayvon Martin, the rifle that killed Trayvon Martin online, He sold it for $250,000, by the way. A $250 rifle was sold for $250,000, as if it was some sort of magnificent museum keepsake. Anyway, he came in from Kansas City. We brought people from Sandy Hook. We brought cops from Maryland, African-American cops, female cops from Maryland, gangbangers from the south side of Chicago, and we brought them all together in a room in Manhattan. And they were each to tell one another a story. But let me briefly say that two of those people, one was Todd Underwood, the guy from Kansas who had that online website that sold Trayvon Martin's rifle, who's sort of right-wing, Trump supporter. And we matched him with Carolyn Tuft, who was in Utah, whose daughter was shot dead in front of her eyes. She had enough buckshot in her own body to have lead poisoning after being shot in the same incident. And they got together to tell one of the stories. Polar opposites. They would not talk to each other. They could not talk to each other. If they're talking about policy, they could not talk to each other. So what they did was they told a story to one another. And you should have seen, they were crying, and it was private and everything. Then they got back in the group. And part of the Narrative 4 program is that you tell the other person's story. So Carolyn got up, amazingly, and she said, "Hi, my name is Todd Underwood. And this is the reason I own 150 guns." And she told a story. She didn't want to tell it, but she told it, and she understood it. And then, amazingly, Todd Underwood got up and said, "Hi, my name is Carolyn Tuft." And then he stopped. And I promise you, for about a minute and a half, it was the most incredible silence in the room. And even the camera people started to cry. And he said, "My name is Carolyn Tuft, and my daughter was shot dead." And he started to tell the whole story. And they became good friends, but he went back to Kansas and he changed the rules on his online gun-selling website to say that you cannot have anonymous entry anymore. You know why? Because he listened to her story. And this is what's wrong with so much of what's going on today. We do not listen really to the other side. And that guy, same guy, I have to triumph him because our politics are completely different. But the first thing he did was he got in touch with our executive director, Lisa Consiglio, and he said, "I now want to do exchanges between Christians and Muslims in Kansas City because I don't understand those people at all." And this is the way that we understand one another. And so my answer to your question is there is nothing that's out of bounds, but there are certain things that you have to be very delicate about and bring it in bounds if you can.
I think this actually coincides nicely with what you just said. So I really enjoyed Let the Great World Spin, and I was very taken with Jaslyn as a character who is a prostitute and who is also black. And I was wondering what, A, was your inspiration for writing in a completely different voice than your own, and B, when you do that, what is your responsibility to that character?
That's a question that thank you for the question, because that's a question that's always on my mind. Because I write out of, like, I wrote a book about homeless people living in subway tunnels. I wrote a book about a gypsy woman who lives in Eastern Europe. I wrote a book about a gay Muslim ballet dancer, you know, and I'm Irish, we can't dance, you know. And then I wrote this section of Let the Great World Spin about this 38-year-old African-American hooker in the Bronx. On a funny note, I will tell you that when I was writing the section, my daughter Isabella was playing soccer at the time, and they're not allowed to come into my office in the house. But I remember a sheet of paper sliding in under the door, saying, "Daddy, let's go to Central Park and play some football." And I remember thinking, as it slipped in under the door, I can't go play soccer right now because I'm turning a trick under the Major Deegan. I'm thinking, then give me 5 minutes. But then in the head of my character I said, "No, give me 4." And I was entirely in her head. But there is a social responsibility. You have to get it right. You know, and it's a big debate. It's a big literary debate. It's a debate on college campuses, you know, about like who has the right to tell someone's story, appropriation, cultural appropriation, all these things. Look, it's something that's on my mind. And, you know, as a white Irish male, should I only write about, you know, where I am right now? I got to tell you, if I only wrote about where I am right now, I would bore the living daylights not only out of you, but out of myself. And I feel that, that my responsibility, not everybody's responsibility, is to try to make an empathetic leap into what it means to be someone else. I do not call upon all writers to do that, because there are certain writers in certain cultures, in certain countries, who absolutely are charged, as far as I'm concerned, with writing about what's going on immediately around them, and they supersede me coming in as some sort of colonial interrogator of their landscape. But if I do it, I better get it right. And so one of the things that happened is, yes, I studied you know, the history of prostitution. I talked to sex workers. I talked to cops who were around in the Bronx in the 70s. I took out like files and went through rap sheets and did all these things to try and get it as right as I possibly could. Nobody called me on it, which is good. But there aren't many women around who were prostitutes in the 1970s, because they all lost their lives to drugs, or else they don't really want to admit to it right now that they were involved. But I think that what you have to do is be, as a writer, as honest as possible to somebody else's experience, and you got to pass it by the experts and try and get it as right as you can. You know if you've done the best that you can. And if you haven't done the best you can, then you've cheated.
Excuse me. Off the top of your head, 5 favorite novels?
Ooh, Coming Through Slaughter by Michael Ondaatje. The Sun by Philip Meyer. Anything by Louise Erdrich. If it has to be novels, I can't mention Terry Tempest Williams, the environmentalist writer. She writes beautiful, When Women Were Birds, for instance, a book of nonfiction, which is really fiction. FUP, the next novel I'm going to write. I don't know. There's so many. I think about the shelves in front of me. You know, I love getting books. I get inundated by books now. I get 24, 25 a week. People want me to do blurbs for them and things like that. And Gary Steingart sends me all his new books.
Would you read the Gary Steingart? So are you guys familiar with Gary Steingart? We've had him here. He has a pretty funny Instagram, if you're that kind of person.
Oh, yeah.
So there's a section, just as a setup, there's a section about blurbing, you know, getting people to blurb you, blurbing them, and it is blurbed by Mr. Steingart.
So I say a blurb is pure fluffery. It's a form of literary porn. So, and it goes on like in that sort of vein. And then, so I asked Gary to read the blurb, and then he responded like this. Colum McCann's chapter on blurbing is full of shimmering heartbreak. Matched only by an angry lucidity and a peerless semicolon. It is an essential guide not just to how we blurb, but to why we blurb. This is a blurb chapter writer to watch. Not since Joyce has an Irishman written about blurbing with such brio and quintessential Ulyssesness. Blurb chapter prize committees, lay down your other chapters. You have a winner right here, Gary Steingart, author of A Blurbistan.
I keep this on the wall in my office. I did the intro when he was here, and I got him to blurb my blurb. Is it possibly the best introduction since Abelard met Heloise? Brilliant and touching and possibly even true. Prize possession. Okay.
I'm wondering if it's more or less challenging to make that leap with some of the historical characters you have in your fiction, like Frederick Douglass, or George Mitchell?
I think that you have to be as honest to your fictional characters as you are to those characters that we consider to be real. So I have as much responsibility to the characters that I create who become real in the world. Like I say in the book, that Tom Joad becomes real, Leopold Bloom becomes real, all these fictional characters become real. So you better be as responsible to them as others. Mind you, I have to say that when I wrote about Senator George Mitchell, it was a little bit terrifying to write to him and say, you know, I want to create you as a fictional character. And he was terrified too. And I talked to his wife, Heather, who's a magnificent woman, and she said, okay, we've read your book, Dancer. We will, why don't you, yes, we'll give you blessing to write about the senator. When do you want to meet him? And I said, I don't want to meet him. She's like, what do you mean you don't want to meet him? I said, I want to go away and imagine him in the exact reversal to what a journalist would do. And then I will come to you again in the exact reversal of what a journalist would do and show you exactly what I've written. And you can tell me what I got wrong. And so then when her phone call came, I was terrified. It was like one of those squeaky bum moments. It was like you think, oh my God, like she's going to tell me how bad this is. And she said, well, I have to tell you that George would never wear brown shoes. Not under my watch. And she told me a few other things about, but one of the weird things was, she said, how did you know where George wanted to be buried? And I said, I didn't know, I just sort of intuited it. She said, because we'd only talked about it like, a couple of weeks beforehand. And I'd said that, in the monologue in his head, that he wanted to be buried on Mount Desert Island in Maine and on a certain cliff face. And that's exactly the cliff face where he'd wanted to be. I don't think that's really weird. I think most of us are pretty telegraphic in how we live our lives. We can, if we're good enough and we're decent enough, we listen well enough, we can intuit so much about what other people happen to be. The problem is that we don't.
I think that is a wonderful place to end. And before we all go upstairs and get our books signed, young writers, let's give it up for Colum McCann, please.
Thank you. Good luck to you. Thank you so much. That was great.